My name is Riley Monroe, and I'm 27 years old. And everything I'm about to tell you started with a silence that lasted 13 years and ended in one night that nearly broke me. I didn't just leave my family, I erased them. Every number, every memory, every trace that could pull me back into that house. People think going no contact is dramatic, like it's some impulsive decision made out of anger, but they don't understand what it takes to walk away from the only people you were ever supposed to belong to. It takes years of swallowing pain, years of convincing yourself that maybe things will get better, years of slowly realizing they never will. And when you finally leave, you don't feel free. You feel empty. I was 14 when I learned what it meant to be unwanted in your own home, and it wasn't said directly, not at first. It came in smaller ways, quieter ways, like my mother forgetting to pick me up from school while my older brother Ethan never had to wait a single minute. It came in the way my father would interrupt me mid-sentence, his voice sharp, irritated, like even hearing me speak was exhausting to him. Dinner tables were the worst, filled with conversations I was never really a part of, laughter that stopped the moment I tried to join in. I wasn't invisible, but I was never seen. Ethan, on the other hand, was everything they ever wanted. He was older, smarter, confident in a way that made people listen when he spoke, and my parents adored him like he was proof they had done something right. I used to admire him too back when I still believed he was just better than me. But admiration slowly turned into something colder when I realized he didn't just enjoy their attention, he thrived on my absence from it. Every mistake I made became his opportunity. Every failure of mine turned into another reason for them to praise him. And the worst part? He knew exactly what he was doing. The first time it truly broke me wasn't some huge fight or a screaming match like you'd expect. It was quiet, almost forgettable to anyone else, but it stayed with me like a scar that never faded. I had worked for weeks on a school project, something I was actually proud of, something I thought might finally make them look at me differently. I remember standing in the living room, holding it in my hands, my heart racing as I tried to explain it. But before I could even finish, my father sighed, glanced at Ethan, and said, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" That was it. No anger. No shouting. Just a sentence that erased me completely. I stood there, holding something that mattered to me, realizing it meant nothing to them. Ethan smirked, just slightly, just enough for me to see it, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, final, like a door closing somewhere deep inside my chest. After that, things didn't get better. They got clearer. I stopped trying as hard, stopped chasing approval I was never going to get. But that didn't stop them from finding new ways to remind me where I stood. If something went wrong, it was my fault. If something went right, it was because of Ethan. I became the background noise in my own life, a presence that existed only to be compared, criticized, and dismissed. And the more I pulled away, the more they pushed. Like they couldn't stand the idea of losing control over someone they never truly cared about. By the time I turned 15. I wasn't just unhappy, I was exhausted. Exhausted from pretending it didn't hurt, from acting like I didn't notice the difference in how we were treated, from waking up every day knowing I didn't belong in the one place that was supposed to be mine. I started spending more time outside, staying late at school, finding any excuse not to go home. Because home didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I had to survive. And then came the night that changed everything. The night I realized leaving wasn't just an option. It was the only way I was going to survive what they were slowly turning me into. I packed my bag quietly that night, careful not to wake anyone, careful not to give them the satisfaction of knowing I was leaving. Every item I put in my backpack carried pieces of who I had been, who I wanted to become, and who I knew I had to protect from them. The house smelled like stale bread and cheap perfume, and I could hear Ethan snoring in his room, oblivious to the fact that my world was ending and beginning all at once. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and relief as I stepped out into the night, the cool air burning my lungs in the best possible way. I didn't look back because I knew if I did, I would crumble, and I couldn't allow that not anymore. Every step away from that house was a step toward freedom, even if the cost was leaving a part of me behind. The streets were empty, except for the occasional flicker of a street lamp, and in that silence, I felt both lost and alive at the same time. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I moved to a small town across the state, took odd jobs, and changed everything about my life. I wasn't just leaving my family, I was leaving the identity they had forced on me. I went by Riley Monroe now, shedding Emily Carter like old skin, creating a version of myself that was free to dream, to laugh, and to breathe without judgment. At first, it was terrifying. I had no friends, no contacts, no safety net. But the more time passed, the more I realized that independence was the only way I could survive. I rented a tiny apartment, furnished it with what little I had, and began to rebuild my life brick by brick, memory by memory. Each day was a battle to forget the past while carrying its lessons silently in my chest. It was lonely, yes, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I had control. Years went by like this quiet, disciplined, carefully structured to avoid ever feeling vulnerable again. I graduated college while working 2 jobs, paid off my debts, and built a life that didn't include them. I didn't keep track of birthdays, didn't answer calls, didn't let nostalgia tempt me into weakness. Occasionally, I would wonder what they were doing, if they even noticed I was gone, but those thoughts were fleeting. Every day was a reaffirmation that I had made the right choice, even if it hurt, even if it meant pretending I didn't care. The anger that once simmered inside me softened into something more dangerous: focus. I didn't want revenge then. I wanted survival, and I wanted a life where I mattered. But as the years stretched into more than a decade, something shifted. Life was fine, or at least it seemed fine until that one night. It started with a ping on my phone. One missed call. Then another, and another. 39 voicemails, all from numbers I didn't recognize at first, until I realized what they meant. My family, after 13 years of silence, had finally decided to reach me. Panic hit before curiosity. I didn't know if I was ready for them. I didn't know if I could handle their voices again, the same ones that had dismissed me, the same ones that had taught me that I was never enough. I listened to the first message, hesitating, my hand shaking. It was my mother, voice trembling, breaking in ways that never had before. She apologized, stumbled over words, admitted things she had never said aloud, confessed mistakes that had left scars invisible to anyone but me. Each message layered another emotional wound, another confession, another twisted form of apology that carried both relief and pain in equal measure. Ethan's voice came next, smug at first, then desperate as he realized he had lost me, that the sister he had underestimated was gone forever. Every voicemail clawed at the walls I had built, threatening to topple the years of control I had painstakingly created. I sat in the dark of my apartment, phone clutched to my chest, tears blurring my vision as I listened to the final message. It wasn't just a call, it was a reckoning, a test of every choice I had made, every boundary I had drawn. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt torn between the person I'd been and the person I had become. The old Riley, the Emily Carter who had wanted love and approval, screamed inside me. And the new Riley, the one who had survived, the one who had learned to stand alone, quietly asked the question, what now? I realized in that moment that the voicemails were just apologies. They were vulnerabilities, openings, mistakes. And for the first time in 13 years, I understood that I held the power, not them. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't fragile. I had survived the neglect, the betrayal, the years of being invisible. And if I wanted, I could use this night, these confessions, this rare and unexpected breaking of their silence, to finally even the scales. I sat there in silence for hours, the glow of my phone screen reflecting off tear-streaked cheeks, listening to their voices, each one a dagger and a key all at once. I could hear the fear in my mother's tone, the hesitation in my father's words, and the desperation in Ethan's message. They weren't calling to reconnect. They were calling because They had finally realized I was gone, and perhaps for the first time, they felt the weight of their choices. My chest ached with conflicting emotions, rage, sorrow, disbelief, but underneath it all, a spark of something darker began to grow. For years, I had been a ghost in their lives, a shadow they could ignore, and now they had unwittingly invited me back, if only emotionally. Each voicemail became fuel, not for reconciliation, but for clarity, for a plan that had been forming in the quiet recesses of my mind for over a decade. I knew that forgiving them wasn't an option, not yet. I wasn't ready to be the victim again, and I certainly wasn't going to let them control me anymore. The memories came rushing back, sharper than I expected, like glass breaking in slow motion. I remembered my 10th birthday when they forgot to acknowledge me while celebrating Ethan with gifts and praise. The sting of humiliation like a brand burned into my soul. I remembered every dinner where I was spoken over, every time I was compared and found lacking, every secret smile Ethan shared with them at my expense. I remembered the loneliness that had driven me into libraries, late-night jobs, and quiet apartments far from home. The solitude that had taught me independence, but left a hollow ache in my chest. And now, 13 years later, their voices, these 39 confessions, reminded me of everything I had endured and everything I had survived. The difference was that now I had power. I had choices they never considered, and I was no longer the scared, unseen child. I made a decision then, cold and deliberate, that would define the night. I wouldn't answer any of their calls. I wouldn't speak to them, not yet, not until I had something of my own to wield. Instead, I began cataloging everything, the dates, the voices, the tones, the admissions of guilt, the subtle cracks in their bravado. Every message was a piece of the puzzle, a map of their vulnerabilities and weaknesses, a way to understand exactly what they feared most. And as I listened, my anger transformed into strategy. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was observing, learning, preparing. I realized that the very same family who had controlled me through fear and neglect had just handed me the keys to their own reckoning without even knowing it by midnight. The 39 voicemails had been played, recorded, and analyzed. I could recite parts of each one by heart, and with every repetition, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I was no longer overwhelmed by emotion. I was focused, calculating, and purposeful. The little girl who had cried herself to sleep under the weight of their indifference had been replaced by a woman who could take control. And the irony wasn't lost on me. 13 years of silence had given me insight and patience, while their sudden need to reach me revealed more about them than it ever could have about me. They had underestimated the strength I had built in their absence, and that would be their greatest mistake. I allowed myself one long, shuddering breath before starting the next step. I knew that this night wasn't about reconciliation. It was about confrontation, and not the kind that required shouting or tears. I would confront them with results, with reality, with the undeniable fact that I had survived without them, thrived without them, and now had the power to expose the cracks they had spent years hiding. It wasn't vengeance for its own sake. It was justice. A demonstration that actions or inactions have consequences. I wasn't going to stoop to their level with anger and cruelty. I was going to be precise, meticulous, and devastatingly effective, and so I waited. Not in fear, not in hesitation, but in preparation. The world outside my apartment was quiet, but inside, plans were taking shape. Connections were being traced, and the weight of 13 years of neglect was being transformed into a force. I had learned patience in my exile, and patience would now serve me well. I replayed their voices in my mind, imagining how each one would feel when they realized I hadn't just survived, I had mastered everything they had tried to control. Tonight wasn't about breaking me anymore. It was about them feeling, even for a moment, the powerlessness they had inflicted on me all those years ago. The next morning, I woke early, the city outside still wrapped in a thin fog that made everything feel suspended in time. I brewed coffee slowly, each motion deliberate, as if the simple act of making it grounded me in the control I was about to wield. I opened my laptop and began tracing back the origins of each call, each voicemail, documenting every number, Every time stomp, every crack in their carefully constructed personas. I wasn't doing this to stalk them. I was preparing, building a map of vulnerabilities that 13 years of absence had finally revealed. My heart didn't race with fear anymore. It beat with resolve, steady and determined. The betrayal I carried for over a decade had hardened into clarity, and I realized that revenge wasn't about cruelty, it was about setting things right in the only way that made sense. With each piece of information, the plan in my mind grew sharper. More detailed, more inevitable. By noon, I had everything organized. Documents, recordings, and notes outlining every lie, every manipulation, every subtle harm they had caused. It wasn't impulsive. It was methodical. I visualized how each confrontation would unfold, how each revelation would land like a hammer, precise and unavoidable. I wasn't going to yell or beg for apologies. I wasn't going to plead for acknowledgement. I had lived without them, built my own life, and proven my own worth while they wasted their time celebrating a hollow image of success. Now the tables had turned. For 13 years, I had carried the weight of their neglect. And now, for the first time, they would feel a fraction of that weight in the cold. Undeniable reflection of their actions. That evening, I drafted a message to Ethan first, the one who had enjoyed my absence and subtly tormented me all my life. I didn't need anger in my words. I needed precision. I laid out everything I had observed, every voice, every confession, every missed opportunity they had taken from me. I didn't ask for anything, I stated facts. His response came hours later, a short, panicked voicemail filled with stumbling words. A tone of disbelief that I had survived, that I had grown, that I had taken what was once theirs and wielded it with intellect instead of emotion. It thrilled me in a way I hadn't expected, this realization that power had shifted, and it didn't come from shouting, just from patience and strategy. Next was my mother. Her voice was always calm, almost soothing, masking something colder beneath. But I could hear cracks, the first hints of vulnerability I had ever witnessed. I played her voicemails again, noting her guilt, her hesitation, and the overcompensation that always followed. I knew how to push the right buttons, how to use her own words to show her that neglect has consequences. When I finally responded, it wasn't with accusations or demands. I let her hear what I had built, what I had accomplished despite her absence, and how her words, her actions had shaped the woman I had become. And as I spoke, I realized the satisfaction wasn't in making them suffer, it was in asserting the truth, in letting them finally see me, fully and unshakable. The night deepened, and I felt no remorse, only resolve. 13 years of silence had taught me the value of observation, patience, and timing. I could have confronted them immediately, but their own messages had provided everything I needed. Evidence of guilt, hesitation, and fear of losing control. I didn't have to manipulate, I simply had to reveal the reality of their choices and watch the ripple effect of recognition and regret unfold. There was elegance in this kind of power, in knowing that my survival was already my victory, and everything else was simply proof. I realized revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and devastatingly effective. And just as I was finishing my work, another voicemail arrived, number 40 this time, unexpected, trembling with emotion and fear. It was my father. His voice, usually so commanding and unyielding, was fragmented and uncertain. I listened carefully, savoring the cracks in his tone, the realization that authority and control were illusions when the person you've hurt has learned to stand on their own. For years, he had underestimated me, dismissed me, and never imagined that I could take 13 years of neglect and turn it into both survival and power. The satisfaction that surged through me wasn't anger, it was recognition of what I had become. I wasn't broken, and they finally knew it. The next morning, I didn't rush to answer any calls. Instead, I let the silence stretch, letting them feel the absence they had taken for granted all these years. I spent the day planning my next move, imagining every scenario, every reaction, every subtle panic that would ripple through them as they realized I wasn't the same girl who had left 13 years ago. I drafted emails and text messages, each word deliberate, each phrase designed to expose the truth without me raising my voice. I wanted them to understand the full weight of what they had done, to see the consequences of neglect and favoritism reflected back at them. Every message I wrote carried power, not cruelty, and I felt a strange calm as I pressed send. The messages were precise, surgical, leaving nothing for interpretation but the undeniable reality of their actions. I watched the hours pass, and each notification on my phone was a reminder. They were paying attention now. Finally, by evening, the responses started trickling in. Short and panicked, the tone desperate and unfamiliar. My mother's message was filled with stammers and apologies, her calm facade completely broken. She admitted she had underestimated the damage her actions had caused, and I could almost see her realizing that her words couldn't undo 13 years of silence. Ethan's replies were frantic, defensive at first, but underneath it all, I could sense fear, the first time he had ever truly feared losing control over me. My father's emails were slow, hesitant, formal in a way that made me smile. He had always demanded respect through authority, but now that authority was gone, replaced with the realization that I had become untouchable by their manipulation, every response confirmed what I already knew. The power had shifted completely, and I held the upper hand. It was strange, sitting alone in my apartment, hearing the panic in their voices after years of neglect. I had imagined this moment countless times, but the reality was sharper than I expected. I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. I was acting out of clarity, out of a need to establish the undeniable truth that I was no longer their victim. I could hear their fear, their desperation, their confusion through the small notifications and messages, and I allowed myself a quiet satisfaction that wasn't cruelty, it was validation. For 13 years, I had been invisible. Now I was unavoidable. And the best part, they couldn't fix this with words, gifts, or fake apologies. They could only face the truth I patiently revealed. By the end of the night, I realized the final piece of my plan was reflection. I didn't need to yell or threaten. The most devastating part of all was the knowledge they carried that their neglect had created the very person standing above them, unshaken and in control. Every voicemail, every message, every delayed acknowledgement became a mirror of their failures, and I felt no guilt in holding it up. I had been patient, I had been silent, and now I had emerged stronger than anyone could have imagined. 13 years of isolation, pain, and invisibility had forged a woman who wasn't just surviving, she was commanding, precise, and aware of the power she held. And for the first time, I understood that the strongest revenge isn't loud. It's quiet, undeniable, and leaves the other side realizing exactly what they've lost. I spent hours reading their messages, cataloging every hesitation, every word that revealed their guilt, every tone that betrayed their fear. I could almost hear them piecing together their mistakes in real time, watching as the reality of my strength sank in. I'd imagined this night 100 times, but the reality was more profound than I expected. It wasn't just about showing them I survived. It was about demonstrating that survival could be beautiful, unstoppable, and terrifying to those who caused the pain. I wasn't just a product of their neglect. I was a reflection of their failures. And I had no intention of hiding that truth. Finally, I allowed myself a quiet moment to breathe, to reflect on everything I had endured and everything I had become. The anger, the hurt, and the betrayal were still there, but they were now tempered with clarity and control. For 13 years, I had carried the weight of their mistakes silently, but tonight they were forced to carry it with me. I had turned my suffering into strategy, my pain into power, and my absence into presence. And as I looked at the clock, realizing how late it had become, I understood that this was only the beginning. They glimpsed what they had lost, and I was just getting started. The following days were a careful dance of silence and observation. I didn't respond immediately, allowing their panic to simmer, letting them stew in the realization that I had survived without them, thrived without them, and could now watch them unravel from afar. I checked the emails, the messages, the voicemails, each one a confirmation of the cracks I'd predicted. My mother's voice grew softer, hesitant, almost pleading in tone. Ethan's arrogance began to crumble, replaced with a cautious attempt to regain control. My father's words were clipped, formal, as though trying to reestablish authority that no longer existed. And yet, none of them truly understood the power shift. I wasn't seeking apologies, I wasn't begging for attention, and I wasn't looking to heal their guilt. I was simply showing them that actions have consequences, and I'd survived their stop by midweek. I decided it was time to assert the final layer of control. The evidence of their neglect turned into a mirror they couldn't ignore. I compiled everything: voicemails, notes, timelines, and the emotional manipulation I had endured. I didn't send threats. I didn't yell. I presented facts, cold and undeniable. Watching them read, listen, and process was its own form of justice. Every hesitation, every stammered word in their replies reinforced the truth I had always known. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and yet I had become unshakable. Their confusion and fear were not satisfying for cruelty's sake. They were satisfying because they reflected the reality they had created for me, a reality I had now mastered. The balance had shifted, and the scales were finally even. Late one night, I allowed myself to reflect on the journey. 13 years of silence had taught me patience, resilience, and the devastating power of observation. I realized that revenge was never about hurting them. It was about reclaiming myself, proving that I could rise above the years of neglect and betrayal. I had survived, built a life, and grown into a woman they could never control. The satisfaction came not from their pain, but from my victory over fear and invisibility. I had transformed every ounce of their rejection into strength, every dismissive glance into strategy, and every moment of being overlooked into proof that I was unstoppable. Finally, I answered one call, the last piece of closure I allowed myself. I didn't beg, I didn't cry, and I didn't plead. I simply spoke with calm authority, letting them hear the voice of the person they had tried to suppress, the woman they had underestimated. I told them everything I had endured, everything I had learned, and everything I had become in their absence. I let them hear the confidence, the independence, and the power that had been forged from years of neglect. And when I hung up, there was no anger in me, only clarity. They had been given the chance to recognize their mistakes, and now, finally, they had. Walking away from that final conversation, I felt lighter than I ever had in my life. The years of pain, the years of silence, the years of watching them take and dismiss me, those years had forged strength, resilience, and self-reliance that could never be taken away. I understood at last that the true victory wasn't in their suffering, it was in my freedom, my control, and the life I had built despite them. Every tear I had shed, every sleepless night, every pang of loneliness had led me here, unbroken, unshakable, and fully myself. I didn't need their approval, and I didn't need their presence. I had become the proof of survival and strength. As the sun rose on that new chapter, I realized the greatest revenge had already been won. I had turned absence into power, betrayal into strategy, and silence into a message that need words. Never underestimate the person you tried to break. The voicemails that had once threatened to overwhelm me now symbolized triumph. They had reached out thinking I needed them, but it was the opposite. I had become someone they could never reach, someone who had mastered the past and commanded the present. And in that realization, I finally felt peace, knowing that 13 years of pain had been transformed into a life I owned. A life they could never touch. The story isn't just about revenge, it's about survival, strength, and the undeniable truth that those who underestimate you will eventually see the consequences of their actions. I didn't need their forgiveness, their love, or their attention. I only needed myself, and that was more than enough. The night the 39 voicemails arrived didn't break me, it revealed me. I was Riley Monroe, 27 years old, survivor, strategist, and finally, the woman who no one could control again. And as I closed my phone for the last time that night, I smiled, because I knew the ultimate justice had already been served. The lesson is simple: betrayal leaves marks, but survival leaves power. Pain can break you, or it can forge you into something unstoppable. And 13 years of silence taught me that the strongest voice is not the loudest one, it is the one that refuses to be silenced. the one that turns absence into triumph, and the one that finally commands the respect it was denied for so long. I am living proof.